Kurt, you were working on a study comparing the efficacy of Cypionate versus the efficacy of Enanthate. That study is pretty much done. People have been asking me, where's the update? Where's the update? Where's the update? Not understanding that peer review and submission and publication takes a long time. And if you want to get the good data, you need months of administration. So can you spill a little bit of information?
Yeah. So, I mean, the background was we were comparing the pharmacokinetics of testosterone cypionate to testosterone enanthate. It was pharmaceutical grade of both, and it was administered by a physician. So there's no self-administration. And the two doses we used were 300 milligrams and 600 milligrams of each because we wanted to see a real effect. And it turns out that cypionate has a much lower peak in serum in most individuals. There were some we didn't see, but the vast majority, it just has a much slower rise and peak. And then testosterone enanthate basically ramps up much faster.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Anabolic Roundtable, episode 11. We've almost been doing this for 1 year. Next year will be the 1-year anniversary. But for now, episode 11, I'm joined with Kurt Havens and Dr. Dean St. Mart. We did not prepare too many topics. So let's just start with a little bit of a life update because last week we had IFB Pro John Jewett on the call and we did not do any live updates. So let's start with Kurt. Kurt, you've been on TRT for a very long time.
6 months.
And I'm sure it's getting boring right now. So what's going on with you?
Believe it or not, it's not getting boring. I think I've accomplished my physique goals to
you look good.
The extent that I could take my genetics, and I kind of moved on from that. I don't foresee any cycles in the near future. I feel good.
Oh, wow.
I'm sleeping well. It's
Famous
actually,
last words,
I've
though.
tried to downsize a little bit. I got down to 208. That's about the lowest that I seem to go. You saw my condition. It doesn't make any sense to get any leaner than that just to walk around.
Otherwise, you have to wear 3 shirts.
Yeah, it's wild.
Overcome the cold.
Exactly. It's wild. It took so long to build all that muscle. It's really difficult to get rid of.
It's not a bad problem to have. Now, if you go off cycle and you fast, like you stop eating, then it goes away quick. But as long as you don't do that, then you should be okay.
Well, the problem for me with one kidney, if I lose it fast, it would probably my kidney. So I'm not, and I don't need to. I'm not trying to look like a normal person. I don't think I need to. A goal of 240 anymore is not realistic.
No, I'm about 230 right now, but I'm a little bit more than TRT. I say TRT for 3, and then people don't get the joke that it's for 3 people. So I said TRT for 3, 625 milligrams. And they're like, that's not TRT. That's 600 milligrams. Is this TRT nowadays? You're insane. I said TRT for 3 people. You fucking idiots. Well, that's the stuff I have to deal with. Enough about me, though. So how's it been going, strength-wise and progress-wise? Like you lost a little bit of size, but are you holding on to your strength? And
yeah, I don't seem to have lost anything. So
that's good. So it's all marinated, and now you can get away with TRT.
Yeah, and I reduced the cardio too. Generally, I'm doing the bare minimum that I can to hold my
10 minutes, 20 minutes.
No, I'm not even doing it daily. I reduced it. I haven't done any yet this week. Today's Wednesday. Last time I did cardio was Sunday. So I might wait till Saturday.
Once a week cardio, right?
I mean, if I don't need it, I don't need it.
Yeah, if you don't need it, I mean, your body fat levels are absolutely great, man. I'm still working my way towards your level of body fat, but I'm getting leaner now too. No more bulking for me. That was not a good idea. Again, when I bulk hard. That's the old school way. So I got up to 122 kilos. It's 265 pounds end of last year. And I was snoring and I had to buy a CPAP. And I was strong as fuck, though. It was so good.
So cool.
It was so cool, man. Like loading all the plates, and then you're not out of breath because you have so much energy. Putting 8 plates on the leg press, and then doing super slow controlled reps up till 12, 15 reps, and then you can barely get off the machine. I mean, you feel like a god.
Yeah,
so pumped, and so many steroids. It was great, but no more. No more. 600 tests for me and some YK11 and Epicatechin experiment.
How do you like the YK11 so far?
So I just started that again about 10 days ago. I did the Epicatechin for about a month at escalating dosages. So I started with 180 milligrams and 360. And then I was like, you know what, let's see what happens if I go to 900 milligrams. And then I did my blood work. And my high sensitivity C-reactive protein was 21.9 or 8 milligrams per liter. So I thought, did I inject injectable anadrol in glycol? And I went through my notes. No, I did not. So the epicatechin gave me tremendous inflammation. Now, there could be a side effect of having chronically elevated follistatin levels. So I was like, okay, I come off, I go to YK11, which also increases follistatin levels based on the animal models. And then my high sensitivity C-reactive protein dropped down to 2.8.
There you go.
Yeah, so it works, but not in the way that I wanted to. And I'm not sure if it's like some impurities or some of the binders, like maybe the tablets are pressed in pure gluten, for example. But I had no symptoms of inflammation. So it could either be a one-off on my blood work, which I highly doubt because the lab that I work with is pretty good, or it really increased my inflammatory markers. And that makes it unsuitable. I couldn't find anything scientifically. I couldn't find anything anecdotally.
Propylene glycol in it?
No, it's just a tablet.
Does it say natural? Does it have natural coloring or?
No.
Because sometimes they'll hide that under there. At least in the United States, that's considered natural, even though it doesn't occur.
No, it's a normal tablet that's a little bit powdery, so it's not super hard compressed. And they use bioperine as a method to enhance the absorption.
That wouldn't do it.
Yeah, the epicatechin was from a tea extract that has the highest concentration of epicatechin. So I finished the deep dive, I recorded, and then I have to do a little bit of additional recording, but that will go live probably after this podcast. So I'm at a loss for words. I'm like, what the hell is going on? I still can't explain it because scientifically epicatechin lowers inflammatory markers, same for bioperine. And I wasn't using anything else because everybody always accuses me that I'm on too much polypharmacy, so I don't know what's doing what. So I'm like, okay, test in epicatechin. And then I switched to test, same dose, and YK11. And I made that switch and my inflammatory markers improved. And my inflammatory markers did not change from a single injection of Follistatin 344, which I know is legit.
Let's look at do you have full labs? We could look at them.
Yeah, I do full labs.
Send them to me before you finish the video. We'll look at them together.
I know, I can't post them all.
No, don't post them. Send them to me. You and I can look at them together.
Okay, yeah. But not during this podcast.
No, not during this podcast. Maybe there's something else on the labs that's doing it.
Yeah, we'll have a look. Yeah, but I doubt. So the only thing that went down was my serum iron levels went down to 50, micrograms per deciliter. So it's below the reference range. And that indicates chronic inflammation. So it's been going on for a while. But I've only been doing blood work once. Shame on me. I should have been doing blood work every time the dose escalated upwards. But I'm a busy man. I can't go to the clinic cost me 2 hours. All right, enough about me. The YK11 experiment is now in full force, and then I'll switch to Follistatin 344, and then hopefully I have something interesting to report to see if Follistatin is even applicable. But based on the gains that I've made, being fat loss and gains of muscle tissue, I would say it's not worth the effort. Yeah, but that goes for YK11 also. Dean, what's going on with you? You're calling in from your mom's basement?
Yeah, I've been trapped in the basement for 2 weeks now.
You're not allowed to leave the house?
No. I'm back in the lovely SN hub again, so I'm in the recording booth and I've already gotten flack for my crappy mic and crappy lighting, so apologies to who are watching the video. But yeah, I've come back over every 2 weeks.
So Dean can buy a Shure mic. Make sure you watch this like 5 times so I can send Dean some money.
It's desperate times. But yeah, I've been coming over back. With the hub, we've launched the FibroScan clinic, the recovery suite with the cryo spa, the infrared sauna. So we're halfway there to full membership numbers, which is awesome. We're only open 7 weeks, so it's been very well received here. Selfishly getting to train in your own gym, which is always a positive, with your own equipment you've handpicked. And I'm like Kurt, I'm what must be now 9 weeks back to 10 weeks since the transplant.
All right, yeah.
I'm getting confused now. 11 weeks since the transplant, and I'm back training now 7 weeks. So I'm back to 125 tomatoes since that start of training, and my weight has gone from 86 up to 96. So I'm back up to 211. I showed you guys, it's it's been ridiculous with training, going back to the logbook and stopping short of that 1 rep in reserve with 7-play hack and 5-play pressing, and there's sort of that itch now of do I really want to go back to the fun stuff or just hold steady into the summertime. So we'll give it another few weeks. We'll wait until we're, I'd say, mid-June at 6 months post transplant, and then decide do I want to have a little bit of fun for a few weeks.
Yeah, why not? Why not, right? At least you can look jacked on holiday. And then, you be the most muscular guy. Yeah, full head of hair, right? And then everybody's like, how did this guy do it? So I went to Turkey. But you're looking very dashing, man. It's the hairline is looking great. Good stuff.
Yeah, it's grown. It's really... I'm shocked. I mean, normally by this stage you should be all like wispy in terms of where your hair, so the camera all here is starting to really fill in. So yeah, it's definitely, if anyone's watching the video and they're on the fence about going and get it done, based on what we talked about, it's definitely something to consider if it's on your mind about saving your hairline.
Yeah. And you're still on that healing protocol, or did you stop that already? So
the peptides just kept BPC in. The epitalon and copper peptide I stopped after 8 weeks. I have been doing IPRF, so the plasma-rich fibrin, once per month.
All right.
And that's been interesting. Their logic at the clinic I go to is they don't do any like numbing when they do the PRF or the PRP. So in terms of pain versus the actual hair transplant procedure, the IPRF has been way more painful than going and actually getting the transplant done, because she's basically just injecting your head with no anesthetic whatsoever about 40 or 50 times.
What's the injection volume per site? Like half a mil, or?
From what I gather, they culture about 2 mils of plasma-rich fibrin. So they obviously do a venous draw, centrifuge, and then come back. To be honest, when she's doing it, I just close my eyes, because literally the pain of it, you feel each injection going along your scalp, and you're just trying to pay attention to not letting her see how much it hurts.
Well, the skin is very tight, like it doesn't move. So if you put like half a cc or 0.1 milliliters in there, it just stretches the skin out. Yeah. And it's so close to your skull, so there must be a lot of nerve endings there. I wouldn't consider it a fun procedure.
Why couldn't you use lidocaine first?
So the thought process at the clinic I go to, and it makes sense. Obviously, one of the pathways of hair growth is inflammation. So macrophage-induced cell debris clearance. So your macrophages come in and clear away any dead cells and stimulate the follicle to grow. Her thought process is, if they numb the area, the actual injection itself is creating a wound in the scalp, and then that recruits your immune cells to the area to utilize the platelet-rich fibrin. And then after the platelet-rich fibrin is injected into the scalp, she does microneedling with a microneedling pen to create even more porous channels for any of the fibrin that has been obviously spilled out onto your scalp that hasn't been injected in. So I've been very impressed with it. It's been very affordable. A session at that local clinic was £200 sterling, which, to be honest, once per month, to offer some extra added benefit from a growth factor perspective to ensure the hair continues to grow nice and thick and strong. It was one of the recommendations. The clinic recommend PRP. If you can get access to PRF, they said it's even better. So I'll be doing that for the next 4 months up until the 6-month mark. And then at that stage, I'll make an assessment. Is it something that I want to keep in monthly or bi-monthly, do every 2 or 3 months to maintain the hair volume? But so far so good. I think anyone that's seen it is shocked for where I am in like 11 or 12 week healing process.
Compared to last month, you almost have a full head of hair now. That's a big change.
Yeah.
Imagine if you do this in your beard.
Actually, I don't think, when you look at the procedure of a beard transplant, I don't think I could go through it. It looks so painful versus your scalp. of how
There's
they
guys who do it
transplant
though.
the
They
hairs
fill
into
in
your cheek.
this area here and like here in the neck. I get it, guys. Vanity, dude. They fucking love to look a certain way. And meanwhile, this is the only hair I have. I fucking hate the hair. Oh, disgusting, dude. But it's a hot climate here, so I can't. I used to have a beard like Dean, and it was just too cumbersome. Man. It would just get greasy and I can't stand it.
Thailand and
I'm not allowed. It's like a reverse psychology with my wife. I'm not allowed to shave my head, but I'm not allowed to shave my beard. So you have to have a head of hair and a full beard. Without a beard, I look about 18 or 19 in the face. It's like one of those
good,
ones
man.
where
That's
your
good.
face
It's good for your
looks,
longevity consultations. Like, how the fuck Dean looks so young? So, yeah, that's why I shave. You look a little bit younger than normal, and then the abuse of the steroids is not so apparent.
Yeah, we went to a wedding a few years ago for one of Morgan's friends, and I was staying at my parents' the night before, and she was travelling from our house down to the venue, and I was using a beard trimmer, and it's one of those ones with an adjustable comb, and as I'm going through it, the comb like slipped and went down to a number half, and so it took like pretty much a big chunk off the side of my face. I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to commit to this, and literally just shaved off the whole beard. Turned up to the wedding, and her friends were like looking at me, like trying to figure out who I was, and then they realised who I was because of the beard was missing.
Your wife was mortified.
It just looked like a little. She literally looked at me and said, "Don't ever do that again, please." So I've had a beard ever since.
Well, if the wife doesn't approve, then you're stuck with that beard.
Yeah, no bueno.
No bueno. So what's your tomato protocol now? Like what, 150 tomatoes to 150 test? That's it?
Less 125, and then the
Jesus.
GH, and then literally just eating and like really being diligent with the logbook. So, I mean, someone seen me recently after a few weeks of being away from obviously the building here, and they were like, whoa, you've blown up. And I always laugh from like a psychological perspective. You don't actually see that weight go on you,
No.
but other people do. That in your head you're like, oh, if this is what I gain muscle memory wise by just training and eating properly again and not being, so focused on maintaining body fat levels, I sort of gave myself an open pass to gain a bit of body fat ahead of the summer. That, yeah, the what if of doing something a little bit extra is creeping in. But then from a hair perspective, you're having to be a bit hair safe without using that word or that phrase. How you build out your setup and
Well,
cycle.
you can ramp up the test and then take finasteride, even though that might, cause impairment elsewhere. Not really a big fan of finasteride.
Yeah. I'm not. I mean, over the last few weeks, I've put back in topical finasteride and minoxidil, just for the fact that obviously topical finasterides, systemic absorption is a little bit lower than dutasteride on the scalp. But I guess, as a tangent, we don't have any real topics prepared for today. Post-Finasteride syndrome, Roaccutane syndrome, post-aromatase inhibitor syndrome. I've slowly come to think that it's all like an NAD deficiency. I think we touched on this briefly before of NAD and NADP being the cofactors.
Yes.
So obviously with post-finasteride syndrome, like we brought up before in the past, Steve, about it, I believe it being an NAD deficiency. NAD being the cofactor of, the aromatase enzyme, helping the 5-alpha reductase enzyme do its reduction reaction. When we see guys with deficits that occur from taking finasteride, aromatase inhibitors, Roaccutane, it's cellular energy deficiency as opposed to a mental disturbance, to speak. So once you start improving NAD biosynthesis and the pathways that feed into NAD production, again coming back to the mitochondria creating your neurotransmitters, being one of the guys that utilize that pool of NAD, you start to correct a lot of these neurotransmission problems that present themselves with post-finasteride syndrome, like no libido, no sexual drive, impaired like serotonin, dopamine levels. And you can do like organic acid testing to prove the theory of looking at the metabolites of the neurotransmitters. So quite often if you implement strategies and you have to deep dive, you look at like the citric acid cycle, you look at a pentose 5-phosphate pathway, you look at all the ways of how we can make more NAD in the body, whether that is, an expensive NAD drip, or is it an inexpensive thing like niacin, vitamin B3, taking it in relatively decent dosage that gets converted to NMN and then onto NAD in our body. There's all these simple little strategies that we can do then to improve that cellular homeostasis that's gotten disturbed from blocking these enzymes.
Yeah, and so ever since I released that video about post-finasteride syndrome, some people incorporated that and said that their energy levels improved initially, right, by increasing NAD plus levels either from niacin or nicotinamide mononucleotide, nicotinamide riboside, NAD plus injections, or upregulating mitochondrial function, which also contributes to NAD production. And then over time, the libido and the mood and that kind of stuff comes up. But sometimes it has a little bit of a lag time of 2 or 3 months, because it takes a while for all these metabolic processes and the enzymatic reactions to kind of normalize again. So these guys, they shut themselves down with finasteride or aromatase inhibitors or Accutane for that matter, all at higher dosages than is generally recommended, because the acne is so severe and the hair loss is so severe and the bloating and the water retention and the gyno is so severe. So they overdo it. Right? Most of the time it's self-induced because the dosing protocol is incorrect. So that means that they have to get themselves out of this hole because they have a chronic NAD plus deficiency. And then before everything is saturated again, similar to how magnesium saturation in bones takes a while, or any other kind of micronutrient deficiency, after a couple months, their libido starts to improve and their energy levels start to improve. And then the erections can, be better again. Their focus goes up, right? Allopregnanolone levels start to restore. But I think a lot of guys are just not persistent with it. And then because their libido or mood problems are not fixed within 1 or 2 administrations, they go from one thing to the next. And then before you know it, they look into sublingual estrogen or estrogen injections or sublingual testosterone or, a PT141 and Semax and oxytocin and whatnot stack. All right. So at least the guys that are persistent and just have a little bit of patience, they usually resolve themselves. And then there's a select group of people who like to just be miserable. And so they'd rather talk about it than actually fix it. I've post-finasteride syndrome for the last 5 years, and they'd rather complain about it to get the sympathy than actually do something proactive about it. Yeah, but you'd be surprised how much you can fix with increasing your NAD plus levels and upregulating mitochondrial function. I just finished the Methylene Blue deep dive and the SLU PP332 deep dive, and the MOT-C deep dive is on the way. And when you read the scientific literature, it's just amazing how much things that can fix. It's such a difference, but people don't want to spend the money. And Methylene Blue is the cheapest option, obviously. And niacin, a simple B100 complex.
Would be the cheapest.
Yeah, it would be the cheapest. I mean, of course, you can't control how much NAD plus you get downstream, but I think if you combine Methylene Blue with niacin, you already have a winning formula. And that's very inexpensive. Dean, what do you think?
The other thing, I agree. And I mean, the other thing, like I said, one of the internal users of NAD within the body is the pentose 5 pathway. So if the pentose 5-phosphate pathway is not working correctly in the body, which is often the case with problems surrounding insulin and insulin sensitivity, you're going to run into issues of NAD biosynthesis in the body as well. So, it comes at 2 angles of quite often the easiest strategies here are nutritional deficiencies and stuff that have been self-induced. They're marginally relatively easy to correct with, like I said, patience. Most people, and you do see it online, they do like to sort of almost have a badge of honor that they've had that problem for so long, when we're really, at this point, we've understood that it isn't really a whole psychosomatic issue, that it's all in their head. But on the other side of it, we've got decent strategies that are quite basic and premise that takes patience and time to correct, rather than jumping from what's one thing to the next in terms of like the shiny object. And you start getting all these crazy protocols, like you said, of injectable DHTs, DHB microdosing, putting in some soft androgens to try and fix the mental problem, when really, like, we're going to beat this to death, and it's sort of going to be in the next 5 years, people will probably watch back these podcasts and go, those guys were really ahead of it in how important the mitochondria of cellular dysfunction and disease. It's really becoming apparent, papers published 2024 of the link of mitochondria to disease. And in some shape or format, most diseases that present in the body can be brought back to the mitochondria becoming dysfunctional. So if we are, inherently going to look at offsetting disease... if you dive into...
Go ahead, sorry, Dean.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to go for it. I was going to say, like, in terms of if you delve into mechanisms of disease, mechanisms of aging, it all comes back to what's at its core, that simple little microorganism or organelle in our body. It's not really a microorganism, an organelle that we've accepted into our body that gives us so many benefits that when it becomes dysfunctional, upsets everything. Energy, neurotransmitter development and production, hormone production. I done that post the other day about clomid and the use of clomids. But like at the very basic level, what creates testosterone in your body? It's the mitochondria. Like, we're going to beat this to death, and then eventually people will be like, oh, well, these guys are starting to talk a bit of sense now.
Yeah, and when you start reading the literature, like about SLU, PP332, MOTC, and some of the other mitochondrial enhancers, you see that it's all linked as a potential treatment of various diseases. And I honestly think, the longer I think about it, is that testosterone deficiency can also be solved by improving mitochondrial function, at least for pregnenolone synthesis, right, and then cholesterol metabolism. And then downstream, it with improved testicular function and improved antioxidant status, the testosterone synthesis should be enhanced also. So I think it's in the end, it's all lifestyle problems where you don't treat your mitochondria well. You're in this chronic inflammatory state and chronic state of oxidative stress, and thus your mitochondria can't function. And as a result of that, they basically give you the middle finger and say, fuck you, no ATP, no pregnenolone, no nothing for you. And then they basically starve you until all the mitochondria and you kind of end miserably. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's all lifestyle. And I think if you really focus on this, like the ancillaries we've done, right? Everybody adopted this. The mitochondria will be next. And then, some optimization in that pathway. And then I think, like you said, a couple of years from now, people will think, oh, wait a minute, these guys were ahead of their time. And hopefully the prices will come down of MOTC, SLU, and mitochondrial aids, because it's not cheap. It's really cheap. Like myo-inositol tripyrophosphate helps with oxygen delivery and oxygen affinity of hemoglobin that optimizes mitochondrial function downstream. And that could be a potential treatment for all kinds of cardiovascular diseases, all kinds of cancer. I just did a deep dive on that today. So I think if you start combining all of these little things, these low-hanging fruit, quality of life, I mean, my quality of life is absolutely stellar right now with all these little micro adjustments. And for the guys that suffer from diseases, I think that would be the first thing they look into, besides dietary changes and lifestyle changes. That I want to bring that to like this new discovery of the androgen receptor that you had, Kurt, because there's a new truncated version of an androgen receptor which seems to miss the GAC repeats. Now, off air, we speculated that the production of this androgen receptor might be a misfire due to androgen-mediated gene transcription, but let's discuss that a little bit more here on air. Kurt, what did you find so far?
So there's two versions of the androgen receptor, the ARA and the ARB, and the ARB is the classic one that goes into the nucleus. That's the one that we really want. The ARA, as understood now, it seems to be the one that's stuck on the cell surface that doesn't cause gene transcription. So it's truncated, which means it's shortened. So a normal androgen receptor is 919 amino acids, and this one is missing the first 187.
I'll show it on screen. Oh,
so it's missing.
Where is it? There we go.
So it's missing. You can see the AF1 section is completely gone. And so while the ligand binding domain at the end on the far right is typically what we would consider where the androgen would bind to, missing the AF1 part inhibits the androgen from fully binding to this. So then you have a bunch of things that then occur downstream. Then estrogen can basically push off the androgen because it's not fully bound. Normally when an androgen binds, it'll push estrogen off, but now it's the opposite thing is going to happen. This will not result in protein synthesis. So this is most likely what's occurring with things like Anadrol, is it's binding to that ARA receptor. What it's exactly doing, we don't know. But like you said, so what's chromosome 11 and 12 contain the material to make the androgen receptor. Something's going wrong during protein synthesis that's creating these, whether it's environmental or lifestyle things or just some genetic thing that's occurring. But it's missing the polyglutamate repeats as well, the CAG repeat.
Right.
There's no CAG repeat at all.
And that's concerning because there's an ideal range of CAG repeats where the androgen receptor binding is heightened, and then a shorter version or a longer version then has reduced androgen receptor binding. And you could see that allegedly with African American heritage, that you have the ideal range of CAG repeats, allowing them to get much more transcriptional activity from the same amount of androgens because it just binds so much tighter. And there's no genetic analysis for that, unfortunately. I looked.
No,
couldn't find it.
A lot of this is new. So it's like you were saying. So there's a shorter CAG repeat is considered better, at least for the stuff that we do, right? But also shorter CAG repeats tend to result in things, not necessarily directly, but things like prostate cancer are more prominent in a shorter CAG repeat. It's also possible that over transcription, what's happening is the CAG repeat's getting shorter and shorter until it's fully gone. And it's possible that this transition between ARB and ARA is not a one-step thing, that it's just occurring over time until the CAG repeat is fully gone, right? Like it might start shorter and then slowly, right, as it's constantly replicating, it's constantly missing amino acids through the
same as what happens to the telomeres of the DNA.
Yeah. So is it aging?
So we need epithalon for the androgen receptor.
There you go. But this explains why you see insensitivity, like one of the reasons why you see insensitivity with androgen receptors. So there's obviously 1,000 different polymorphisms that can occur with the androgen receptor that we know of. But this seems to explain a lot of non-response that you see. We've all had clients that, regardless of the androgens that they use, they don't really respond particularly well. This could explain that. This could also explain the amount of the ARA versus ARB, could explain things like side effects, right? So the people that are very sensitive to things like trenbolone perhaps have more ARA, and they're not actually getting the protein synthesis from it. They're just getting the calcium ion stimulated nerve stuff, right? Which is going to cause, overstimulation, anger.
Central nervous system stimulation. Okay, so it's very interesting. And of course, scientifically, this hasn't really been investigated that much because it's reasonably new information. And so all of the scientific evidence is basically regarding androgen receptors has been performed on ARB activity, not on ARA. Do you think this will ever be investigated?
I do for sure. So it was discovered in cancer, and it turns out that a lot of the estrogen dependent cancers, when they stopped looking at that and they moved over to the androgen receptor, they found that there was more ARA, so that DHT could no longer perform its actions, right? And kind of bump. DHT would normally help balance out the estrogen and not allow estrogen to fully transcribe. And it's very possible that, that it needs to be explored because it has a lot of health repercussions.
Because you see in the scientific evidence that diet testosterone has been linked to inhibiting estrogen-mediated gene transcription in various cancers. So basically when DHT interacts with the estrogen receptor, estradiol can't really potentiate its full effect. And of course, if estrogen binds to the androgen receptor and the CAG repeats are missing, allowing for normal androgen binding, they get some sort of weird transcription or impaired transcription.
Or no transcription.
Or no transcription, right. And that also means you get depletion of androgen receptors, which would otherwise have a beneficial effect.
Yeah, so once it starts, it's going to continue and get worse, right? Because then there's no protein synthesis occurring, so then there's no new androgen receptors being made.
Exactly, yeah. And then you basically deplete till the point you're completely, you have androgen insensitivity syndrome.
Yep.
Do you think that you get androgen receptor B transcription from the DNA, and then through some enzymatic reaction, the GAC repeats are cleaved off, resulting in an androgen receptor A variant?
Or it's
like
occurring during
dipeptidylpeptidase 4
Yeah,
enzymes?
or it's occurring during transcription, right?
Right.
When A or B is supposed to be formed, it's not forming correctly.
Now imagine if this is caused by oxidative stress, that the link at the 188th 188th position is susceptible to oxidative stress, like DNA is susceptible to oxidative stress, and mitochondrial dysfunction is the cause.
Could be. Well, why are these things getting more prevalent now versus in the past? Now, granted, they weren't necessarily reported or discovered, and the life expectancy used to be much shorter. So it's hard to say, but it's my guess is it's a lifestyle thing, right? Drinking, smoking, poor diet, lack of exercise. These things very well could at least contribute to this. Is that causing it? I can't say that. That's not a valid statement, but
yeah, I'm trying to remember if I have like clients in the past that have some sort of androgen desensitization or non-responsiveness to androgens, whether they switch to a nandrolone-only cycle or not. Even then, nothing happens. What their lifestyle was, if they were drinking, smoking, oxidative stress, genetic hereditary issues.
Nandrolone wouldn't work for sure, right? Nandrolone only binds to the AR, so its action is like same with Primo, right? That's its only mode of action. So it's not gonna. None of those. Trembolone wouldn't do much. Or positive, we should say. They're still going to cause other effects in the body, just not a positive effect.
Because you see some guys that had like a terrible lifestyle and then they need TRT and they go on TRT and nothing happens. That's pretty clear that they were under oxidative stress, drinking, recreational drugs, stress, etc. Right? Okay, that happens. But I'm trying to think now back in time where I had guys that were otherwise healthy that switched to TRT for androgen replacement therapy or bodybuilding purposes, and then nothing happens. I'm trying to think about it. It's been a while since I really helped kind of guys. Like you work more with these guys than I do in a coaching capacity. So do you see a correlation between lifestyle and androgen insensitivity?
It does seem that the people that seem less sensitive to androgens either had a poor lifestyle habits in the past or currently still have some overlapping things like some drinking, a tendency just for bad stuff.
Yeah.
And then they're not really responsive.
Do you think that these guys are subjecting like manual labor, for example, where you're subjecting yourself to environmental pollutants, BPs, A's, endocrine disruptors, that kind of stuff? Because every job has its potential risk. Like I'm just trying to think out loud and see where this is coming from, whether is a transcriptional error or this actually happens after transcription, the androgen receptor is formed, and then due to some sort of exogenous mishap, all the GAC repeats are cleaved off.
I'm going to guess it's during translation or transcription, but it's very possible that it's still occurring after the fact. Like maybe it starts as an ARB and it goes to the cell surface and something occurs to the cell and it cleaves off. And then it can no longer go in and generate, androgen receptors anymore.
Then you should be able to find these 187 amino acids that contain the GAC repeats floating around in the bloodstream. So that might be something to look into, like as a metabolite, right? Like what they drew with drug analysis and regarding excretion studies. They have this compound, it's cleaved into a couple fragments, and they look for these amino acid sequences.
If it's being cleaved, if it's just happening during protein synthesis, then no, right? They're just not being formed.
Right. Yeah. So that remains to be investigated. Yeah. But yeah, it does explain why some people respond better to other things besides the GAC repeats. I mean, if you're missing GAC repeats, nothing much is going to happen. Just like Dean's internet connection today.
Yep. Exactly.
No GAC repeats in Dean's internet connection.
And you could say, so like the subcellular androgen receptor that we don't know anything about, right? That Winstrol and danazol bind to. Perhaps that's just missing a portion of this and not the full. So maybe it starts there and then it gets worse.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you think it compares to, you have growth hormone receptor, right? Mm-hmm. And that's actually a truncated version of the growth hormone binding protein. Mm-hmm. So growth hormone has a binding protein that can actually act as a receptor when it attaches to the cell surface. Do you think it's something similar like that?
It's possible. The difference with the peptide receptor, like growth hormone receptors, it's never really going to go in. It doesn't fully go in. It's causing downstream stuff to go in versus an androgen receptor itself will come on in. And that's that's one of the reasons why you don't want to inject growth hormone intramuscularly, because it's not supposed to be in the cell like that. Growth hormone is a cytokine. So if you put it in a cell, the body has a harsh immune response to it and it destroys it. So you lose 20 to 30% of the growth hormone by injecting it in that method, because it'd be like similar but different than like insulin. Like you're not supposed to inject insulin IM.
Right. Very interesting. I really wonder if this will ever be investigated, and then if there will be a genetic analysis for it or some sort of solution to prevent people from getting ARAs instead of ARBs. Because ARBs are the anabolic
I'm currently
ones.
working on a project with that, so we will see
Thank
how
God.
it goes. And we already started. We have the study outline done, so now we're finding the subjects that want to do this.
Sign me up.
You want biopsies?
No, never mind. Never mind. Never mind. I'm buying out. No biopsies. I need every muscle cell that I can.
And you're a good responder, so you might not be a great candidate.
Yeah. Yeah. True. So if anybody is a poor responder to anabolics, contact Kurt. If you're willing to undergo some biopsies and you live in the United States, maybe you can get some pharmaceutical testosterone prescribed, even though it might not do anything.
Compensation.
Yeah, get compensation. Dean, you went a little bit ham on Instagram about the nitric oxide inhibiting effects of methylene blue, because people always like to bring that up, right? You and me, we like methylene blue. And then, but it's a nitric oxide synthase inhibitor, Steve, and it diminishes the pump. Now, forget the 1 hour deep dive that I made. And the first topic I addressed in the beginning was that it's kind of fake news. It only happens at higher dosages. Did you suffer any repercussions from this commonly reported side effect that only happens when you megadose the methylene blue, Dean? I'm sure you get tired of answering this question also.
Well, I think if you're to look back at my pictures on last year's prep taking methylene blue forever long, 5 months or thereabouts, I think my vascularity on the surface of my skin looked pretty okay. And I was even taking methylene blue right up to peak week. I think when people cherry pick statements like this, and I'm going to be quite harsh because when we view a nitric oxide inhibitor, first and foremost, what are you talking about? You know, science, making a statement in science has to be quite specific. So if you're saying, oh, it's a nitric oxide inhibitor, well, what isoform of nitric oxide synthase is it inhibiting? Is it INOS? Is it NOS? Is it ENOS? If it's ENOS, endothelial nitric oxide synthase, which is what creates nitric oxide in your bloodstream, that vasodilates your bloodstream, then that's going to inhibit NO's positive impact on vasodilation and blood flow and vascularity and whatever else. But if it's inhibiting INOS, which is inducible nitric oxide synthase, which is what your body makes as an pro-oxidant. So NO in your body is an actual oxidant. It can create nitrites and nitrates. So when we view nitric oxide, it's not this harmless thing that creates a pump. It's a very important cell signaling molecule that, helps with vasodilation, but it is also a cell signaling molecule that can indicate that there's a serious infection in the body. That's one thing. So quite often, sepsis being one of the main medical ways that methylene blue is quite often used. High doses of methylene blue is sort of like a one shot in the dark that person's probably going to die with sepsis. You know, not to be harsh, but it's a very difficult thing to treat in an emergency. You basically have a load of final strategies of, is it going to really hurt the person anymore if I intervene with this strategy, or what is my potential positive possibility or probability of improving the outcome of the patient living? And they quite often give a very high dose of methylene blue as a nitric oxide inhibitor to reduce INOS expression, to try and save cells from being destroyed because of this massive flood of nitric oxide. So when we look at the science, yes, high dose methylene blue will lower nitric oxide, but it's from INOS. If anything, the research actually says it has a positive impact on upregulating ENOS, which is what creates nitric oxide in your arteries for vasodilation. So if we're going to cherry pick, the statement is correct. It is a nitric oxide inhibitor, but it's of NOS and INOS as opposed to ENOS. So, you know, for when we're rediscussing science and we're going to cherry pick correctly, that has some positive benefits to ENOS. And I guess the other comment that I was often asked was, what about staining of your organs from high dose methylene blue? To my knowledge, that will only occur with high dose IV as well. And if you imagine you were putting a synthetic blue dye straight into your bloodstream, that within minutes reaches probably every organ of your body. So yeah, it's more than likely going to stain some of your cells blue, because that's what it was designed to do, was a microscope stain. That if you put a big massive dose straight into your bloodstream and you die and they do an autopsy, well, I wouldn't be surprised if they found blue cells in your heart or your liver or your kidneys. I think taking it orally...
So you see that in the malaria...
Yeah. I don't think you're going to experience cell staining with a 5 milligram dose ingested orally. To be honest, could be wrong, but every incidence, and there is only probably 2 or 3 when you search through the scientific literature, of organ staining from it, and it is from high dose IV.
Yeah. And in the cases of malaria and sepsis, the dosages increase upwards from 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight by intravenous injection daily for multiple days in duration. So that could be 700 milligrams if you're a 100 kilogram bodybuilder, intravenous for several days. Most of the time it's like 2 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight. So that's already 200 milligrams. So who in their right mind is going to take 200 milligrams intravenously? Unless you have experience with intravenous administrations. And even for priapism, right, with a prolonged erection caused by Viagra or Cialis or Levitra, then the injection protocol is 50 milligrams intracavernosally, so directly into the penis. And then it inhibits nitric oxide production and allows for normal blood removal from the penis in combination with epinephrine.
Yeah, literal blue balls.
Also, yeah, exactly. You literally get blue balls. So, but that's in combination methylene blue at a high dose, 50 milligrams into the penis with epinephrine, right, to cause vasoconstriction, allowing for blood to kind of diffuse out of the penis. So as long as you're not IVing anything over 50 milligrams or injecting that locally, I think the only way it would diminish the pump and cause nitric oxide inhibition is if you start doing that pre-workout, 25 milligrams bilaterally into the biceps, and then you might get a diminished effect. But all these guys that don't want to take methylene blue because they might not get an erection or a pump in the gym, man, it's an overreaction.
Yeah, and the pump doesn't contribute to growth, so I wouldn't obsess about the pump anymore.
Besides the fact
the pump is pretty useless.
It's pleasurable.
And no one should inject anything into their penis.
Well, maybe try mix. Papiferine and hey, works, man. Allegedly, not talking for personally. Yeah, not talking for personal experience. So it's funny that these things we have to deal with. Like I addressed it in the methylene blue deep dive, but I got, I think, like 1,000 new or 2,000 new subscribers from that. It's very popular, this compound. Yeah, because RFK was taking it in the airplane and then it goes viral, right? So I got a lot of new subscribers. And then even though I addressed it right at the start of the video, people were immediately in the comment section, it inhibits nitric oxide synthase. Like, dude, take a fucking Cialis and shut the fuck up, right? It increases cyclic guanosine monophosphate downstream, and then you mitigate any kind of deleterious effect on the methylene blue. But yeah, this is the stuff we have to deal with as educators. Oh my God.
Yeah,
talking about things we have to deal with. Yeah, so Dean, you want to interject a little bit more? I thought I had a segue.
I was just going to say, even with the whole nitrate thing, I guess we just have to, like I said, just be a little more careful in how we spread rumors, if you want to put it that way, or incorrect information. And probably at the close of it, probably the worst thing, I guess, that is warrant to have a discussion with methylene blue to sort of close this section is the the effect on neurotransmission. That's probably a more important side effect to discuss than going around throwing that, oh, it's a nitric oxide inhibitor.
Yeah, because the drug interactions through MAOI inhibition and selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that's a little bit more worrisome. I mean, I got full-blown serotonin syndrome combining vortioxetine with methylene blue, both at like entry-level doses, luckily only one day, and then combining fluvoxamine at a moderate dose with a moderate dose of methylene blue, that seems to be acceptable, right? Now, will I get long-lasting serotonin syndrome-like side effects? That remains to be seen, but so far, I'm good combining 50 milligrams fluvoxamine with up to 10 milligrams methylene blue, but some people don't respond well to that. So I highlighted that in the deep dive also, because there's a lot of people on SSRIs or antidepressants in general, which modulates serotonin and dopamine levels in the brain. And then you have all these dopaminergic drugs like Adderall and tesofensine and, 9-MeBC and whatnot, nootropic, XYZ. So all these drug interactions people need to worry about, or think about when they start adding in methylene blue, because I think methylene blue and warfarin have the most amount of drug interactions I've ever researched, comparatively to all the other stuff that we take. Like if you take testosterone, okay, drug interactions, caffeine, aromatase inhibitors, that's about it. The rest is all synergistic, but methylene blue, warfarin, and a couple of these, or metformin, a lot of drug interactions. But it's also because these compounds have been extensively studied compared to other medications that we take. So yeah, these things are, God forbid people do a little bit additional research. Like I couldn't possibly cover everything in the deep dive, and then even in my deep dive, I forgot a couple things. So I'm going to make a part 2 about methylene blue, maybe a month from now, because there's a lot more to discuss. But yeah, you're right, Dean. It's the interactions with, MAOI inhibition and serotonergic, dopaminergic, and epinephrine, if that's even correct. Like that's something that's concerning. Yeah, especially if you stack higher dosages together. Like, did you experience anything serotonergic side effects, Dean? No, right? Because you don't take an SSRI.
No, and I guess if anything, I probably benefited even more positively with my own polymorphism. I've got, MAOA++, which is a very fast operating MAOA enzyme. So genetically, I am susceptible to low serotonin. I'm not going to say depression, but low serotonin. The methylene blue most definitely does uplift and help with that MAO inhibition, which keeps serotonin longer in my brain, alongside dopamine as well. So I definitely see the neurotransmitter benefits alongside the oxygenation benefits on the mitochondria. And, to go back to what I said previously, mitochondria make serotonin and dopamine, they make neurotransmitters. So you've got efficiency in creating the neurotransmitters and then efficiency in keeping them in the synapse or reuptake for, another synaptic transmission.
Yeah. Scientifically, it was shown that methylene blue, in particular medical conditions, can cause serotonin syndrome at 200 milligrams intravenously upwards. But even depending on the medical condition, serotonin syndrome might happen or might not happen. So again, if you keep the dose moderate, I think you can get all the benefits regarding serotonergic and dopaminergic effects. And if you go to 200 milligrams, which again, there will be guys out there that will go crazy high dose. Like there's guys out there that take 50 milligrams. I'm like, what are you doing? Why? It's 10 times the dose that we recommend. Like, are you going to? Well, of course, people take a Gramatrin also. I mean, I've been there. So, yeah. And then I wonder why you're on the floor salivating and feeling hot to the touch, It's so silly, dude. Yeah, I think it's a very versatile compound that needs to be respected. Right? Low dose just go a very long way. And if you go on the Dr. Dean stack with MOTC and SLU, then a low dose is, for the mitochondrial function, it's game changing, honestly, And it saves you money on MOTC and SLU, because people complain that they need to ramp up the dose of SLU to a gram. No, dummy. Just add in a little bit of methylene blue, and then you get the synergistic effect. I need 5 milligrams MOTC. No. 1 milligram. It's a shame. It sucks for my affiliate sales because I'd rather have people use more, but I have to keep it real with the audience. Less is more if you stack it together. Like Dean, it's now known as the Dr. Dean stack. You can't go back.
No, I should have invested shares in SLU years ago with this future prediction.
Hey, man, you introduce something, at least it should be named after you.
We'll
talking about introducing something, that my segue before, but I got interrupted. Kurt, you were working on a study comparing the efficacy of Cypionate versus the efficacy of Enanthate. That study is pretty much done. People have been asking me, where's the update? Where's the update? Where's the update? Not understanding that peer review and submission and publication takes a long time. And if you want to get the good data, you need months of administration for this data to be valid. Not only one person, but multiple people. So can you spill a little bit of information?
So the background, so I mean, the background was we were comparing the pharmacokinetics of testosterone cypionate to testosterone enanthate. And it was not to discourage the use of cypionate. It was just to show that they're not the same thing, that they're not—
You wanted to tank the stock.
Not necessarily interchangeable. And what we did is a graded dose. So it was pharmaceutical grade of both, and it was administered by a physician. So there's no self-administration. We didn't want anyone measuring or weighing anything because people can't clearly do that. And the two doses we used were 300 milligrams and 600 milligrams of each because we wanted to see a real effect. And it turns out that cypionate has a much lower peak in serum in most individuals. There were some we didn't see it, but the vast majority, you can show that. I sent you that image. Do you have
it's okay. Save that for the study.
It just has a much slower rise and peak, and then testosterone enanthate basically ramps up much faster. Right. The half-life seems about the same, but testosterone enanthate seem to cause a much higher peak in the serum.
Right.
So if you're someone who doesn't feel good on testosterone enanthate, then cypionate is still a valid drug. It's just not going to do the exact same thing, right? I hate to say muscle gain would be affected, right? But peak in serum is a valid metric when you're looking at like dosing of how much muscle you're going to gain. So it's possible that maybe enanthate would cause a higher peak. Something I think people also should look at when you look at the Bayesian studies with testosterone, that is, it's done differently than most people assume. Again, cherry picking data. If you actually look at the administration, he gave the dose in one shot a week. So the 600 milligram group got 600 in one shot. So the peak was much higher. And that probably contributed to that much more massive amount of growth than if they microdosed it, right? So again, if you're concerned with side effects and estrogen, things like that, microdosing things can make sense, or if you just want to keep things very stable. But if you want to really leverage an effect out of something, right, you want a higher peak serum. Yeah. So that's what he did. And a lot of it was done because you're not going to get people to show up to your office 3 times a week to get them injections. So it was easier just to give it in one big shot. But that being said, when you look at the numbers in those studies, that's how it was administered.
So for your study, did they come in once a week or twice a week or 3 times a week?
Tried to keep it twice.
Okay.
We just split the dose in half. I figured that with those esters, that's totally a fine way to administer it.
Yeah.
So it was split in half. So 300 was 150 twice a week, and the 600 was 300 twice a week.
And it's all in the glute or other administration sites?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the most stable absorption spot.
We were just trying to eliminate any possible variable, right? Different size shoulders, different, activity levels. Glute is, for the average person, your glute's just going to be moved a lot more around during the day than the shoulder. Yeah. That's probably why the absorption, it's a bigger muscle, but it's probably just because people move, right? Versus shoulder, if you sit all day, you're probably not getting as much activity there.
Right.
And we were thinking about doing a second part. We open it up to even a broader group and see if we can get a larger study. But yeah, I thought it was neat.
So what we're going to do is when this study is out, we should cover it in depth because that gets views, and then more views on these studies should guarantee bigger funding. That's why I usually help Tim Pietkowski with some of his studies, because you get more eyes on these studies, and then there's a demand, and then there's more potential funding for follow-up studies. So by all means, we should just address it in an entire episode when it's peer-reviewed and ready for publication.
Correct.
And then we'll really go through it in depth because it's cool to see the results. Yeah. Like you showed me a little bit of results, and it's a clear difference. like what Dean pointed out regarding sexual binding globulin depletion. that's a steep reduction.
Pretty cool.
Without going into your results, Kurt, I mean, it was just night and day difference. You know, dosages held the same, just swapping the ester to speak. That SHBG falling dramatically was, in theory, then it might show premise that if someone wanted to control SHBG better, CYP might be a better compound. But my takeaway from that data was bioavailability of CYP, knowing that free testosterone as well lowers SHBG, is a lot lower with testosterone cypionate, which is incredible to prove.
Right. How are the estrogen levels comparing cypionate versus
we have them all. Relatively
okay.
similar. It wasn't
similar. Okay.
Yeah. So two things about the study. So it was self-funded. I paid.
Yeah.
The doctor and I that did this study, we paid for everything. We paid for all the drugs.
Oh, holy shit.
So, and not super expensive, but I wasn't going to involve a pharmaceutical company. I don't think they really care at this point, right? Drugs was invented in the 50s.
Yeah. So it's a crowd-funded study.
Yeah, and I also didn't want one of them, if something groundbreaking came out, to then take the credit for this sort of thing. Doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Why hand it to, Pfizer or Merck for no reason so they could claim they found it. And what was the
I think Pfizer has some financial incentive not to
get
be
these
involved. Results published.
So
there goes their Cypionate formulation.
So the gist of why I was looking at this was, so on the Cypionate ester, same as an MPP or on Parabon, you have an aromatic ring. And I think that people that don't have a lot of organic chemistry knowledge misinterpret what those esters look like, right? Traditionally, you would just count the carbons and that gives you the rough days that it's the half-life. But the problem is with that aromatic ring, it's much heavier and bigger. And so it's changing the way it's broken down, and it actually looks like it's inhibiting the way it's broken down. And my initial, I think, influence on this was that there was a study that was put out in 1961 on nandrolone, where they compared MPP to nandrolone decanoate. And the end result was that MPP wasn't that efficient of a drug, so they pulled it. Oregon had pulled MPP off the shelves after a year and just went with decanoate. That study is difficult. It's not public access. It's difficult to read. There's a lot of calculus in it. There's organic chemistry in it. So the average person is not just going to flip through this thing.
Right.
And but it shows that they've kind of had an idea about this stuff for a long time. It just never really came to light. And it's just Parabon is another example, right? So it's possible that that's not a fantastic ester for trenbolone. It might have kept the levels lower and steady in humans, but compared to acetate, it's just not going to produce the same result.
Yeah, maybe that's also why it was pulled off the market, besides the fact that it was produced in arachids oil, which is inflammatory for some people.
Yeah, but who knows? But I think that is the aromatic ring is kind of the key there, is that you really want to use a straight chain fatty acid with an ester, ideally.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll overlay the images of testosterone propionate and testosterone enanthate. And Dean, you mentioned something in the private chat that it has to do with phosphodiesterase 5D. Which version was it? That might have a problem with this. 7B.
Phosphodiesterase 7B is the one that we understand as the cleaving enzyme to remove the ester. And we might have touched on it in a previous episode in the beginning on what I felt that the cypionate 5-carbon ring might be a little too bulky, that it doesn't allow the testosterone molecule with the carbonyl part of the ester to enter into the binding part of the enzyme to remove the ester away. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, when you take the ester drug, you're looking for the actual parent compound. It's a pro-drug. So testosterone cypionate becomes testosterone. Testosterone enanthate becomes testosterone. You're just cleaving that ester away. That if you have, like Kurt said, from a chemistry perspective, and this is where it's useful of looking at molecules in 3D, and I've done like a video before with Kurt where we looked at some molecules in 3D space. The space that's occupied in a 3D dimension with cypionate is a lot different to a 5 member carbon chain that can actually like twist and contort itself in space to make itself fit. Whereas when you've got this big bulky ring, like Kurt is saying, in space, it can't really do much. It can like maybe rotate and contort a tiny bit, but it can't actually like squash on itself, if that makes sense, to fit in. So these long, bulky esters, the efficiency of getting into that enzyme is probably a lot lower. And I'd said to Kurt, something that might be useful is to find an in silico chemist, a computational chemist, that could do a quick computational model of taking a PDE7B enzyme and computationally working out the binding affinity of it into that pocket versus enanthate. And I'd say the efficiency, the binding efficiency of the enanthate ester into that pocket is probably way higher than cypionate. And from that, you're able to then derive some level of drug affinity, and then you'll be able to come up with some level of like bioavailability of this is what we would potentially expect with the ester removed for the free drug molecule to enter into serum. So it's really cool. And I mean, for anyone watching, the results when they are shared, it is black and white.
It's pretty cool
to be.
Yeah, and it is
very,
so people understand too the layout and why it takes so long. Like all the things Steve said, a real study takes a long time to conduct. So we had to administer the doses separately, and then there was a washout period where there was no testosterone for 12 weeks because we don't want any overlay. We don't want like cypionate still lingering in there, and then you add enanthate on top of it. So it's a long, extensive process, and then now we're going through all the data, and then we have to translate that into something that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and then finish up the article, and then it needs to be submitted to peer reviewed and then published. Yeah. It takes time, man. It takes time.
And not to harp on MPP, but this is kind of, this translates to MPP. And so I think why a lot of guys will use MPP and they're afraid of Deca is they think it's more mellow or the short ester. It's not actually a short ester. That aromatic ring is actually so much bigger ester. It just never quite peaks the same as nandrolone decanoate. So you don't get the same side effects, right? If you're someone who doesn't tolerate Deca, but you tolerate MPP, that's really, you're just not absorbing most of it. And it's not, and it's dosed at 100, and it's dosed at 100 milligrams per cc typically versus the 200 for NECA because the ester is so large. It's not that the base is bigger because it's a short ester. It's because the ester takes up so much space in that solution.
So the concentration has to be lower. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we're going to get a lot of broken hearts again.
Again, I'm not deterring the use of any of these things. I just think I think as a community, we should start to understand how these drugs work and why they're different and, when and why we use certain things.
The science is there to progress the sport. Right? This is why we do this kind of stuff. Bring new information to the forefront. And if that makes people upset, then so be it. We're trying to push this field forward, and there's not so many people looking into these kinds of drug metabolism pathways. So if that makes people upset and it causes some esters to fall off the popularity list, then so be it. So be it. And maybe that's why people don't experience less side effects with cypionate, simply because the serum concentrations never reach. Yeah, they're lower. So, and it's good to hear that. I always said that Enanthate is best, and that's almost proven.
The other thing I think is as well is cypionate tends to be the one that is quite often anecdotally reported as having a higher incidence of post-injection pain. And if you think about it, what Kurt's results are showing is that depot of drug is sitting there for longer because of the ester isn't able to remove it and bring the parent compound into circulation. So the fact that we see guys saying, oh, well, CYP tends to cause massive amounts of irritation, it's probably because the drug's residency time in the muscle is probably slightly longer than enanthate, and it irritates the tissue by not being brought into systemic circulation quicker.
Which is funny because the original introduction of enanthate the original introduction of cypionate was, they claimed that enanthate hurt. So they were trying to come up with an ester that didn't. In fact, they invented something that hurt worse. Potentially.
Yeah, in theory.
Yeah. Same as with Sustanon, right? Some people have an absolutely amazing response, and then other guys don't respond well to it because you have 4 different esters.
Yeah.
And some of them metabolize faster than others.
Well, the failure with again, all these drugs that were into the 50s, they just didn't have the chemistry knowledge that they do now. So the failure with Sustanon is the original thought process is that they would all release at different points, and you would just have this. The problem is they all release almost the same time, so you get this massive peak, and then they slowly drop off. But you're getting too much of a spike in the beginning, and then not enough of a proper treatment. It just doesn't hold. So Sustanon could be a good drug, but you probably have to inject it every other day just to keep it stable. So to me, that seems like a pointless thing. I think people like things that are new and shiny and fancy. So there's always some like allure because it's a blend, right? Like guys will buy things that are a blend because they think they're getting more or something, even though a single ester would do just fine.
Yeah, especially if you inject every day, then it kind of doesn't matter. Then only the carrier oil matters because carrier oils metabolize differently from the injection depot. And that affects the half-life too. And that actually has been studied comparing tea oil or peach oil and castor oil, for example, or sesame oil. And then you see that the half-lives and the lingering time and the lag time is different as well between the release of testosterone enanthate to increasing serum testosterone levels without the ester. That all differs. So in the end, I would just go with something that works. And if scientifically you can prove that Cypionate works less favorably than enanthate, we can, pivot some people into enanthate ester, which of course in China they'll be happy with that because they can sell more enanthate raws.
Or they can put a big shortage on it, like everything else.
Yeah, artificial shortage.
Add that to the Masteron, Primo, Anavar list.
And add testosterone enanthate. And a Cypionate will be super cheap.
They'll just have Cypionate. That's
I'll be on a permanent 50% discount. This was pretty much the topics I had in mind. Dean, you have something you really want to discuss?
No, I was just going to say that then we'll just have to go on a trademark testosterone butyrate or something like that to fill the market cap.
Yeah, it's funny. If you go to Wikipedia, you see like an index of all the esters that testosterone has been produced in, and it's the most funny esters. There's even like DMZ, like Superdrol being attached to each other, right? There was also testosterone that's bound with an ester and then 2 testosterone molecules on the outside. So percentage-wise, it's a much larger amount of testosterone compared to the ester because the ester binds 2 testosterone molecules. So maybe we can bring that to the market. That will be the new and exciting ester. Yeah, that can be the new trend.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's sort of probably where, when results like this comes out, then there's more questions on, well, a better drug delivery of testosterone is probably more favorably suited to shorter chain esters. And before you know it, we're like going to testosterone acetate for fast delivery of TRT or suspension.
You'd be surprised.
You have to go to the doctor every 10 minutes.
Yeah. Or you go with the patches and then cream becomes more popular, right? I might as well do testosterone cream on the nutsack for the most stable levels, And then meanwhile you're, pollinating everybody else in your household. Yeah. Testosterone. Why's my cat so muscular? Why does my kid have a beard? It's a testosterone cream, baby. Oh, man. Yeah, I'm excited for that study. So what do you think is the publication time? Like you're submitting it to the NIHA next month?
Yeah.
And then how long do you think?
Within a month or two. Should go fast after that.
It would be good if we can do that for the 1-year anniversary of this podcast. And otherwise we'll do it on the 13th episode.
Because it's not using any new drug, right? There's no like interest in it per se that is going to hold it up, right? No pharmaceutical company is going to rush out to like invest in something and hold it up. So no one. Well,
Pfizer might want to hold it up.
Pfizer might care, but I mean, it was invented in 1952. I don't know if they really care that much.
I don't know what their sales are. I remember when they pushed out the vax, then all the ampules or the vials were used for the vax, and then there were no ampules or vials available for testosterone cypionate. And then they produced in 1 milliliter or 2 milliliter vials for a while, which they got off China, that they usually use for the peptide companies. Like that was like for a year almost. The SIP was found in those 1 milliliter, 2 milliliter generic vials. Yep. was hilarious. So yeah, so maybe they will care, or maybe we'll pull it off the market, like other formulations like oxandrolone, and I saw that Eli Lilly was suing some compounding pharmacies for tirzepatide. Compounded with vitamin B12 or that kind of stuff. I'll link that article down below. So yeah, you never know with these pharmaceutical companies, man. They might be after to get you. So if you disappear at one point, then we know which study that you in.
Never seen again.
Never to be seen again. Do you guys want to briefly discuss how to maximize your off season as the final topic for this podcast? So even though it's summer's coming around and everybody's dying to get in shape, we discussed on the podcast with IFBB Pro John Jewett that using more steroids in the off season might be a suitable approach if you really want to gain that size. Now, I think initially still you might want to use less compounds in the off season because the food volume goes up and the caloric intake goes up, and then you can modulate your training. But there comes a point in time where more food and less drugs might not get you to that size you want. So I'm talking about getting from 250 to 300 pounds, not from 150 to 200 pounds. Kurt, what would be your strategy?
Well, according to all the modern pros, it's 300 test and 200 Primo, right? three units of GH.
It's fucking exhausting, dude.
I don't know. I've had the best luck with pushing hard for shorter periods of time. I would rather run a few grams for 8 to 12 weeks and get the job done and then pull back out and hold it versus just kind of linger in some gram territory where you're not really getting much out of, right? And you're still building up that fatigue. It's still not really healthy for you. I mean, most of the big guys probably used pretty heavy cycles at one point in their life to get to that size, and then they don't need quite as much now.
Unless they want to push upwards. So if they want to jump a weight class or they really want to go ham for the Mr. Olympia, then the dose just escalate upwards to the multiple grams, Yeah,
I mean,
unfortunately, they don't talk about it.
No, they talk about what they currently use now to hold their shape, but that's pretty irrelevant once you're already that big. It would be like, if someone asked me at the gym what I'm on 150 milligrams of Ester 5 days, but that's not what I use to get there.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I use to hold that. That's a whole different story.
Yeah. And they call you a liar for running 250 tests or 300 tests. When in reality, I went up 2.5 grams, 3 grams at periods of time. And that's where most of my size came from. And in my last off season, I was on 1.5, 1.7 grams combined. And I was pretty big. And that's with increlex and growth hormone and all the good stuff. So how can we do it healthily though? Like if you say that like maybe a higher dose for a shorter period of time and then easing back, is that better than slowly escalating the dose upwards and having like this 2-year off season where you're just an increasingly progressive dose just ending up at a couple grams?
I don't know. Is there any, Dean, have you ever seen any studies to show any data if that's any safer? I don't think there is anything that exists.
No.
I would rather push. I mean, the healthiest compounds can be testosterone and growth hormone, right? They're endogenous.
Yeah.
So I would leverage those harder. I think with test and GH, you can accomplish a ton. You might not need other compounds.
That seems to be the most sustainable. Of course, people get too excited for the other compounds. Like I need Deca during the off season, need Anadrol during the off season, and there's something to say for it.
Oh, that's what I used in my last cycle. I mean,
my
last cycle was 1,200 test, 800 EQ, 800 Tren E, and 100 Anadrol, and a bottle of Serostim a day. But I ran it for 8 weeks, and I gained 20 pounds.
Yeah,
and then I've been on TRT, and my blood work was fine, and I've been on TRT ever since. And only because I've purposely been downsizing, did I lose anything. I lost 3 pounds when I came off the cycle, and my weight basically stayed the same all the way through the Arnold, which was 5 months after the cycle. And I just decided that I didn't want to. I wanted to be able to run again. Basically, I was sick of not being able to move. And
so that's exactly how I felt when I was 265. It's like, I need to be mobile again. This is ridiculous. I can't even get out of bed without being out of breath.
Yeah. So I did that to myself. That wasn't some lack of drugs. I think it's really easy to hold what you've built with, you don't need that much food. You don't need that many drugs. But I don't know. I think like what Chase did, right? Where he escalated, I think Chase Irons escalated this dose up over a long period of time until he got to a thing. There is something to be said about that. Is that as efficient as just, I mean, I didn't go right to that dose, but is there something to be said about bombarding yourself once you have some level of experience with the proper chemicals and just getting the job done and pulling out? I would still opt for that. You know, and you saw my labs, and my labs were not affected if I stayed on. If I use, let's say, Test and Primo to do that, but I stayed on for 4 months, would my labs have been better, worse? I don't know.
It seems to be like a duration thing. And I think the longer you expose yourself to even moderate to higher dosages, the worse it becomes. Now, again, compound selection highly contributes into that, and experience and how you can mitigate the side effects by doing blood work, using ancillaries, little adjustments to your nutrition, right? I mean, and avoiding particular compounds that are worse than others. Like you saw my C-reactive protein went up so much from epicatechin. And so even though I would be in favor of increasing your follistatin levels through some sort of pathway, epicatechin might not be the suitable one. Again, based on an anecdotal experience of one using my blood work, personally, I would not use that in the future, but maybe use YK11 or follistatin 344 to kind of leverage that follistatin and myostatin inhibiting pathway to really maximize the gains. And you can make tremendous progress in a very short period of time, or you can do it a little bit slower, but then you have to limit compound selection to bioidentical hormones, which is usually what I preached, in the step-by-step cycle design. Like if you're going to do this for longer periods of time and start at 250 test and end up at 2.5 grams, then just use test and GH and insulin. If you like insulin, I like insulin. But because your body seems to tolerate that better than going on a gram of test and a gram of Deca and then 500 boldenone on top, or a gram of boldenone and 500 Deca on top, and then throwing the Androgen at the end. Their blood work parameters are generally a little bit worse. Yep. On a drug stack, you might be bigger though. So due to the synergy.
Yeah, but I mean, I used probably some very harsh chemicals when I did mine. I think some of the things that mattered is I ate a balanced diet. I did cardio every day, 7 days a week. I was super anal about doing cardio, and I never get fat. So my body's fat always stays in the single digits. And we see in all the guys I work with, the leaner they are, generally the better their blood work is. The blood work gets out of whack in the off season when guys are eating garbage and they're getting fat. Yep. And if you can stay in some sort of shape and do cardio, get fiber in, and take care of your health, your body can tolerate some pretty high androgen loads for a short period of time without really falling apart.
Right. So if you do non-bioidentical, it's okay to do a shorter period of time and kind of blast your socks off. And then if you want to do a longer off season, it's probably better to limit your compound selection to bioidentical stuff and then slowly taper upwards. I think we can draw a nice conclusion there. And then it really depends on what you want to be, right? Do you want to make slow progress and just be large and in charge for an entire year straight? Or go through this roller coaster where you're an absolute freak for like 12 weeks, or growing into that freak status for 12 weeks, which is basically what I did last time. And then everybody's like, what the fuck is going on? And you're the same because you're so strong, but you start to build up like these little micro injuries, and your tendons start to hurt because you get so freakishly strong. And then you need a little bit of time off to kind of reset, regroup, restore insulin sensitivity, restore your blood work parameters if they skewed, and then do it all over again. I think, can we draw a conclusion there? Dean, what do you think?
Yeah, as I've gotten older, I've I still hold a belief of what we all speak about in terms of it's not like a mute point for discussion that you have to go to high dosages if you want to be insanely big. That is, a fact at this point that we've all discussed. Can you do it in a more healthy fashion than I think what we've sort of proposed here in terms of two solutions? Kurt's short-term blast strategy, which was quite popular back in like the early 90s, and then the slow, steady bioidentical approach, which you're sort of seeding your body with stuff that already naturally exists, albeit in a higher amount, and you're playing off your own natural biochemistry. I see both of them being relatively equal in some sense or form, but then the other side of it is it still comes back to guesswork on your total dose of where's that sort of sweet spot of androgen receptor activation in muscle tissue and not, you know, like we've said, spilling over into other tissues to cause oxidative stress or side effects. That it's still, whatever way you choose to do it, if you go to the pathway of, like Kurt said, with a short, quick blast, well then it's probably not wise to have high doses of like aromatizable compounds or stuff that's going to maybe contribute to side effects, because you put a higher dose of test and everything else, then you have to put more ancillaries in to control some of the side effects, and it just gets a bit blurry. So do you go that route that you're using, more so anabolics with some stable dose of testosterone and everything else around it, like the test EQ anadrol perspective, or you've got, you know, your side of high dose test, you know, moderate GH, moderate insulin use depending on appetite, foods, utilization, insulin sensitivity, and then maybe you might need an aromatase inhibitor if you're someone who naturally aromatizes in a high amount and you want to have some level of control over estrogen with that high dose test. You might need a small amount to keep estrogen in check, as opposed to letting it run loose, and what we see with like angiotensin receptor issues, ACE expression, blood pressure, gynecomastia, fat gain, blah blah. They both, I think both of them serve a purpose where you have to take the genetic individuality of that person and figure out what's more appropriate. And again, it comes back to goals, like you said. Do you want to be a massive sort of, not bloat god, but do you want to gain size very rapidly in terms of, like, you know, intracellular fluid retention, glycogen, I guess a higher rate of glycogen synthesis and everything else like that? Or are you looking to, you know, accrue muscle tissue that, like Kurt has explained, sort of stays around once the lean tissue is built? It's relatively easy to maintain with the right stimulus, nutrition and training. So the end goal, to speak, is to gain muscle tissue if we're bodybuilders, but the aesthetic side of being as big as possible, you have that route also with the other strategy. I think if I was to go back and sort of do what I done for pushing size when I was competing, I'd probably still stick with, you know, a strategy like Kurt's of like a dedicated 10 or 12 week block with a heavier emphasis on higher dose anabolics with, you know, because I aromatize high naturally, keeping a very known controlled dose of test and then using the other anabolic compounds around it. But, you know, keeping that controlled like 10 to 12 week block. But back then, you know, I was training like DC style of just complete utter
annihilation,
stupidity sometimes training. Yeah, that, you know, over the last 7 weeks of being back training, being on like a strict, like my blood work came back 24 nanomole, I've gained 10 kilos by literally leveraging more food and making sure the logbook is beaten each week with still good strict tempo and stopping one rep in reserve, but still training heavy, still training with progressive overload. That size that's come back is muscle memory from when I was at my heaviest, lifting heavy and everything else. That when you develop that tissue from that past exposure and you're able to generate the stimulus that built that tissue, which is the mechanical tension and training, it'll come back. Like, I don't think, like Kurt said, there's something to consider towards total peak serum testosterone and muscle growth. But the fact that I've gone up 22 pounds in 6 weeks, my face is showing it here in the camera, that has been just through diligent tracking of more food and getting progressively stronger week on week. That the hormone level isn't really the most important thing in that whole equation, because everything else hormonally has been stable between TRT and growth hormone use. Yeah. So we then start to really see. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so but that's also because you're growing back into your previous muscle memory. We're not putting in new tissue, and
exactly.
The new tissue is not there. You would have to bump up the dose to really get new tissue in.
This is the thing now. So what I probably find now is in probably the next 2-3 weeks, naturally I'll probably just hit my quote unquote natural plateau somewhere around 98, 99 kilos. That if I want to get any bigger, I'm going to have to go to a higher androgen level to allow more muscle protein synthesis to occur, more leveraging nitrogen retention and all that sort of stuff. That I think we sort of underestimate, even when we're talking about dosages, going up too high too quick. Yes, that short and sweet blast, like Kurt said, is like a more controlled, shorter exposure to a high dose, but you could completely overestimate the dose that you chose for that run. And that's not necessarily a wrong thing, but it could be a wrong thing, and that it could generate side effects and health consequences. So it's difficult to say, that's the greater option over the other, the slow, steady approach of bioidentical stuff. But if I was to follow it in my own current case, I would probably, rather than knowing that, my days of like a short blast like that is probably not there anymore. If I was to choose my next step, if I reach that plateau in a couple of weeks, I'd probably go 250 tests, and maybe, depending on appetite, I might add in a small dose of insulin at one meal on top of the GH. Would I push maybe the GH from 4 I use on the training days up to 6 or 8? There's those small little leverages that could I then continue that for a longer period of time over an anabolic setup. It probably comes back to what we all talk about as blood work. So whatever strategy I choose, whether it's that long and slow bioidentical or short and sweet anabolic androgenic steroids stack, your blood work's still going to tell you at like week 8 whether you're in danger or not, or what something has changed or not, whether it's a responsible decision to continue. Both scenarios still require the same decision matrix, 8 to 10 weeks into whatever you've chosen to do, and either you pay attention to what the blood work is saying or you ignore and just continue on.
Yeah, I'm risk averse to any blood work changes. Like, let's see what I can do. So what do you guys think about like a hybrid approach where you leverage the bioidentical hormones until you reach a certain point, like let's say a plateau in dose or progress, but then it also means that you're primed, right? Your food intake is high, your metabolism is high, your training intensity and your volume and all that stuff is like perfectly adapted for, let's say, 1.5 grams of testosterone. And then you throw in an 8-week do or die crazy cycle, because instead of slowly building up to that with a crazy cycle with, test EQ, trend, etc., you kind of leverage the bioidentical hormones to the point you get stuck. Your blood work parameters are a little bit skewed, but there's room for abuse, sort of say, to push you over that edge and go from 260 to 280. So you go up to 1.5 grams, for example, with 6 IU's growth hormone, some insulin, and some ancillaries to keep your blood pressure in range and all the health ancillaries needed to stay as healthy as possible. And then you do your blood work and you're like, now I'm going to throw in another gram of Primo and maybe 150 milligrams Tren and 50 milligrams Anadrol pre-workout 4 times a week, 200 milligrams total. So you go from 1.5 grams to 2.5 grams or 2.7, increase the growth hormone, ride it out for 8 to 10 weeks, make phenomenal gains, and then cruise. Because I think there's something to say for that as well, right? You leverage the bioidentical stuff until you get stuck, and then you go with the kitchen sink approach to push you over the edge, put some new tissue on, get phenomenally strong to the point your blood work says fuck you, and then you come off and cruise out and maintain all of the gains on bioidentical stuff, allowing you to get healthy again. What do you guys think?
I agree. I think more guys should leverage test for a long time before they even start adding compounds in. I think where the modern thing with the guys using very little amounts of test, then adding Primo immediately in before they're even at a clinical dose of testosterone, I think that came from Derek, but I don't think they were understanding what Derek was talking about. Because if you actually listen to what he was saying leverage test as high as you can go before you get side effects. He wasn't saying do 140 test. And then he never
it's a new thing because people are scared of tests because they're feminists.
Whatever it may be.
I want to do low test and high masteron. What are you?
Why?
Bro.
Yeah.
That's the women approach. What are you doing?
And you'll get, most guys would get more out of leveraging tests than they would out of, like, unless you're competing and you're getting on stage, test will do 99% of the stuff all the other drugs are going to do.
Yeah, and if the only downside is that it might increase epidermal growth factor and make your skin a little bit thicker, but you can mitigate that by getting your body fat levels down. Okay, the skin on your back might be a little bit thicker.
Who's going to know? My picture, my skin doesn't look that thick. I've been on this for a long time.
No, and who's banging you from behind? That's going to matter. I mean, let's be honest here. Like, they're not going to bang you from behind and say, "Oh, dude, the skin of your back is so thick." That's not how it's supposed to be, in a normal. At that point in prison,
does anyone really give a shit?
Does really give a shit? Exactly. So the only downside for testosterone is that it aromatizes and might make your skin a little bit thicker over the other compounds. But regarding the safety and efficacy profile, it is still the best bang for your buck. I mean, we didn't put testosterone in S tier for no reason. So it. Like, I've done bioidentical hormone cycles many, many years, right? Until I started experimenting a little bit more for content purposes. My blood work was almost impeccable on testosterone-only cycles. We're talking about an HDL of 50, an LDL of 110, and that's without ezetimibe or statins. Hematocrit didn't budge. The liver enzymes barely changed. And then you start experimenting with other stuff, and then your blood work skews and literally falls out of your arteries, trying to run away. It gives you a phlebotomy. That's how scared your blood work is. So I think leveraging the testosterone and the bioidentical hormone stuff for as long as possible, and then you close your cycle off with a bang and throw in the anadrol and the tren and whatever for a couple of weeks. Sure, and then you feel like a freak, but your body also hurts. From a joint perspective, like, oh man, I'm so strong now. I'm doing 50 or 80 kilo incline work, and then after a while, your body just kind of hurts, and then you need a break. And also from a blood work perspective. So I think that's the most sustainable option. But it's not sexy. It doesn't sell. Because you have to stay on test only for like 4 to 6 months. And then you have 8 weeks of a honeymoon period with Trembolone in the picture. Whereas guys rather be on Trembolone for 6 months and then do a consultation about kidney failure. Dean, what do you think? Are you already fantasizing about your next off-season cycle? I see your gears grinding.
You just see the numbers running through my head.
Yeah.
I think
600 tomatoes.
I think like some bananas and pineapples and a mango. I think what we sort of discussed, offline before was when Kurt brought that whole up about like guys being risk averse, which is how we've sort of started the podcast. And I put my hand up and I was like, well, yeah, I'm probably to blame for some guys running like 150 tests and, being a bit like, oh, do I need to push it? But that sort of low test approach stemmed from me sort of personally being like a high aromatizer. So I know if I go like way above 125, 200, 250, inevitably I have to use an aromatase inhibitor, albeit in a low dose. So now I've added in this other compound that I have to use to mitigate my genetics of high aromatase expression to try and keep that in a relative normal range so that I have like mood stability from, the higher estrogen creates more serotonin, can feed into mood issues. And so for me personally, that just makes more sense that I know everything is steady at 125. So I'm just going to leverage in like last year's contest prep, 300 Primo, 200 Nandrolone or whatever, or 200 bananas and 300 pineapples. That, I know that dose is steady. It fulfills biological need of bioidentical testosterone. And so personally, I don't need to go any higher than that with designing the rest of it around it. But that's not to say that it's like a set in stone rule. Be very risk averse with, I'm on I'm taking a steroid cycle, and you ask, and it's like, well, I'm on 150 tests, and it's sort of, well, as your total testosterone probably upper 20s, bottom 30s, or in US terms, maybe I think 850, 900. That it's an optimal test level, but when we're talking about like peak dosages and serum levels, it's right probably at the bottom of the end. That if someone is going to look to aspire to be an open bodybuilder, I guess if they want to be maybe and not to put it down, but in terms of like classic bodybuilding, which is what I stayed in, you have a cap that you have to stay within. So there's a relative amount of where you can go to in terms of body weight before that's it. You're going to not have any room to push any further, because when you drop down, you're going to have a hard time making your weight limit. But if you are someone aspiring to be an open class bodybuilder who wants to be 235 to even 250 on stage, there is going to be that requirement of, like you said, you're going into big numbers, and there's no denying that or trying to sweep it away. It's just how you arrive at that big number is probably the more important journey, rather than deciding, right, I'm going to be an open class bodybuilder, I'm going to go on my first cycle, and the first cycle is 1,000 milligrams of tests.
Unheard of.
That we have these two options that we've discussed there, and they do 1,000 milligrams of test your first cycle. Are you going to get great benefit out of that if you have like your university foundation of what we discussed with John, of like your training, your recovery, your health ancillaries, budget for food and everything else? Of course. But is that immediately like your first dose choice in that step up? Probably not. But we shouldn't, like we've said, you shouldn't shy away of going, well, at some point you're probably going to have to go up towards those numbers to experience size growth. And I mean, we discussed in the early days, like my peak off season when I was pushing for classic bodybuilding was 300 tomatoes, 600 pineapples, 300 bananas, and then there was some apples thrown in pre-workout. That those are
the best.
I'm not. Yeah, so you're not
one or two apples. There's a big difference, man. One or two apples, a big difference. Yeah,
it is. Kurt's a fan of two apples, anyway.
Well, three apples made my blood work.
Yeah, 3 injectable apples split bilaterally.
You're going to get people now running out apologies of trying to inject apples. Please don't do that.
If it's an MCT oil, it's fine. Good stuff. I have some allegedly in my steroid drawer. Swole. Fun.
I'm not denying that, like my peak size, and we shared that picture of me at my biggest 108. That was over 1,000 in terms of numbers. I think total load, total dose, like 1,400, 1,450. That you're not shying away that in order to be that size, yes, of course, there's going to have to be a push and pull, and you can't just try and go, I got to 108 taking TRT, because it'd be absolute nonsense to have that discussion. Unless you have phenomenal genetics, then maybe.
But that 108 is not a pretty 108. That doesn't happen for everybody.
No.
If you're doing it on TRT, then you're probably a quarterback, physique where you got 25% extra lard running around.
Where I am now, body fat wise, I've still probably got decent abs at 96 or 211. I'd say, like I said, 98 is probably where naturally I know I'd probably tap out at TRT. And even just recovery and strength progression and everything else, that I'm not even like polarized to think I can get into the like high 100 kilo numbers naturally to speak with that dose. That, like I said, if I was to approach where my next step be, probably I'd leverage the tomatoes up, but then I'd have to start adding in an aromatase inhibitor that just then it requires another level of care, that you're going to have to check blood work periodically to make sure that you aren't keeping estrogen totally flattened out. And, week to week, you might even require an even lower dose aromatase inhibitor versus another week, depending on your body fat distribution, what you've ate, your environment and everything else. That it's not like straightforward. If I go to 250, I had in 12.5 milligrams of aromasin twice per week and everything stays dandy. Some weeks you might need 12.5 once per week. You might need it twice per week. You might not even need it at all, depending on how the enzyme expression has been affected from the suicidal inhibition. So, yeah, it's complex from what we've discussed here, but there's no denying that for all intensive purposes, when we are like educating and trying to be healthy, yes, that low entry is relatively a good thing to consider, but you're not going to get massive in terms of like, if that's your goal to be as big as humanly possible, it's just not achievable with that dose. And that's an important thing for us to obviously discuss.
Yeah. Now, I know that the comment section is screaming right now, Dean, why don't you use the other S-tier steroid Primo to control your estrogen levels? Dean just had a hair transplant, and Primo's not hair safe. Yeah, that's why you'd rather escalate the dose of testosterone with an aromatase inhibitor.
My days of pineapples are probably going to be way behind me now moving forward if I want to maintain what's up there.
More for me.
More so because...
More Primo for me.
I'll have to organise a deal with you of what's left there from times past.
Yeah.
Like, I think, like that, even with my blood work with the 125 and the 300 last year in prep, my estrogen was completely bottomed out. So in that instance, we know you have to have a certain level of estrogen for hair growth. And even now, since going from the 60 milligrams to the 125 after the transplant, I've noticed that I think that my estrogen has been sitting quite high the last couple of weeks. But regardless, like in a position I'd go and do blood work, but the other side of it is, even if my estrogen came back high, I'd be still a little I'd be conservative of using aromatase inhibitor while the follicles are still growing and maturing to go in and lower that estrogen. Now I just have to ride out the relatively elevated estrogen wave until I'm satisfied that I can do a little bit more control, that the hair follicles have properly embedded in and are stable and safe, as to speak.
Did you notice any beneficial effects regarding high estrogen levels from using methylene blue through MAOI inhibition? Because that's what I notice. My estrogen is 220 picograms per milliliter because I run 625 tests without an aromatase inhibitor because I wanted to see if YK11 has some aromatase inhibiting effects, which technically could happen. It's reported anecdotally, and based on my previous cycle, my serum estradiol levels weren't so high. So I ran 625 tests per week for 4 weeks, 5 weeks without an AI doing the Epicatechin experiment. Serum estradiol came up from 140 to 220. So I think that's a normal increase over the course of 4 to 5 weeks. And now I added in the YK11, but I did not notice any estrogenic side effects mentally, like irritation or poor libido or that kind of stuff, because I'm also using methylene blue. Whereas previously on high estradiol with fluvoxamine in the picture, I was insufferable. So maybe this is a way around it for you.
Yeah, I mean, that does raise a good question. I have noticed. I think probably how I can tell surrounding the raised estrogen for me personally from a symptom perspective, if you want to call it a symptom of high estrogen, is obviously a small bit more fluid retention. So again, face is a little fuller, a little more emotional. When you watch movies, you can feel a little more mentally emotional. And I'm not going to shy away from the fact, if anyone has watched the series on Netflix, Adolescence, I did cry at the end of it. So if you were watching it, I'm sure you can relate as a father if you watch it. But yeah, you know, normally you wouldn't be as emotional, but that really, Morgan was shocked. She like looked at me, she's like, "You're crying," and I was like, I wasn't ashamed to admit it. It's a really good program.
Get out of here. It's raining.
You know, the emotional. Yeah. You're crying, not me.
Yeah. It's just splashing on my face.
That was quite an emotional story. That in the past, you wouldn't be like apathetic, but it would stir emotion in you, but it wouldn't really like hit you right in the gut. This really, like the closing scene, I just emotional wreck. So
was it that bad? Okay, then your estrogen is really high. It happens for me when I watch those little documentaries on the Dodo or another YouTube channel about cats being adopted, and then it's insane, dude. But I have 7 cats, so it's probably the same as being a father. I have 2 months left, and then I can relate. Then my wife will give birth. I'll watch Adolescence after that.
Watch that. And that program, in the comment section, if you have Netflix, it's 4 episodes. A very interesting program. Raises a lot of questions now as my kids obviously get older in the age of social media and its impact on teenagers. And, you know, it raises then our duty, you know, what we're always doing is educating to be this sort of point of discussion for, if there are teenagers watching this, which I'm sure there are, like 16 to 18-year-olds or even younger, involved in physique progression, that we are the sort of, I'd hate to call it, but the sort of father figure type that we are open to having the conversation. We don't shy away from the facts, but we are quite stern and, you know, really showing the risks and making them aware to prolong the decision to do something like that. But not be sort of, you know, it's a taboo topic. You can't be talking about that. Because I mean, like, uncles. Even, you know, from...
So when you're 18, I'll take you out drinking, and then they patiently wait until they're 18 and say, now we're going to hit the bar, and you get them fucking drunk.
And then they realize I don't want to do that. And then they realize they don't want to do it again.
You don't want to do it again. Yeah. But that's the best way to learn, man. Straight to Trembolone acetate to get Tren cough on your 18th birthday. You still want to buy the build? You still? I'll do the injection for you. I go, right, where's the vein?
You'll find the vein, yeah.
Kurt, anything you want to add to... Kurt, anything you want to add for the off-season plans? And then we're going to wrap it up because I know you have a call.
No, I like both of those options. I think they're both good, depending on where someone is and what their goals are.
All right? Cool.
Everyone has different risks.
Yeah.
One to take.
Yeah, I'm not risk. I'm tolerant for a couple grams myself, but I'm not sure when. I'm not sure when that's ever going to happen. Because I'm going to be a daddy soon, and I got to ride that through until they're at least 18. So the next 20 years, I got to be a little bit more careful. But up until this point, I cared less. That's why I had so many experiments over the last couple of years to the enjoyment of the audience. All right, guys. I'll come up with a couple topics for the next Anabolic Roundtable. That's the 1-year anniversary. We have to do something special, but I'll figure something out. And guys, if you have any suggestions in the comment section, we're not going to do any live injections. That's not YouTube approved. But we can do something else that's interesting. The 1-year anniversary is pretty cool. And that means we've lasted longer than most podcasts discussing these kinds of topics. So a little pat on the back for us. Good job, Kurt, Dean, and Steve. Any closing words for this episode? No?
No.
Just thank you for listening.
Yeah,
thank you for allowing us to continue doing what we do best.
Yeah, I'll donate some money to Dean's new microphone fund. And then if Kurt is coming up with a new study, I'll donate some funds for that as well. Because if we can debunk more esters, then I don't mind being proven right with scientific evidence that Enanthate wins hands down. Whether that's Test Enanthate or Primo Enanthate, both are my favorites. And yeah, scientific evidence to prove that. I'm all for it. Okay, with that, we are out. You can find all of the social media accounts of Kurt and Dean down below. As usual, we'll convert all of this to clips for the Clips channel. That is really kicking off. People are enjoying the Clips channel with the short, bite-sized anabolic roundtable clips. I think there's 100 clips there already, and this podcast will provide another 10 clips, which all of your social media details are linked there as well. Both of you are available for consultations in case you don't want to go with me anymore because I'm so fucking expensive. These guys are still reasonably affordable compared to me, but for how long, I'm not entirely sure because I hear that these guys are filling up. So hurry up while supply lasts. Kurt, Dean, thanks so much. This was a highlight of my week. We'll see you next month, and then we'll do the 1-year anniversary and come up with some cool topics. I'll see you guys then.
Thank you.
Peace out.
See ya.